Our second presenter is Seth, and Seth has a presentation on The Exorcist and Peter Pan. Seth is the jump faculty member at Walla Walla, and I should not say more because he's coming already. I wanted to say more, but I'll let him introduce himself because he's coming already. I don't want to take his time. Seth, thank you, Seth.
Thank you for having me. I want to apologize in advance for how fast I'm going to have to talk to get through this, but the paper is on the website if you want to engage it. So here we go. In 1993, Robert Gale, writing under the pen name Von Allen, recounted a tale of delivering a woman from the demon of immaturity. He described her as having, quote, the body of a mature woman, but she thought like a little girl, end quote. Throughout the 1980s and 90s, Gale wrote books on deliverance. He believed that one must obtain the name of the demon in order to cast it out. To free Ellen, he would need the name for a demonic tormentor. Ellen's demon revealed itself as Peter Pan. This demon would not allow, quote, this demon would not allow her to grow up emotionally, end quote. According to the demon, he had entered Ellen when she was a child. After her deliverance, Ellen confirmed that she had seen Peter Pan around 15 times as a kid and had become obsessed. The result was that she always thought of herself as a child. Gale reminds the reader of 2 Corinthians 3:18's words, quote, by beholding, we become changed, end quote. The story of Peter Pan is the culmination of Gale's warnings that demons may take control of a person's life, not only through occult involvement, but also through Nintendo games, monster toys, TV, videotapes, and, quote, 100 other ways, end quote. As one reads about these other ways, it becomes clear that Gale was influenced by tropes belonging to a period known as the Satanic Panic. The moral panic had seeds sown in the 1970s that erupted during the 1980s and early 90s. It contained numerous hoaxes related to Satanism that resulted in real-life trauma. This paper situates Gale's work in the context of the Satanic Panic and demonstrates how both Gale and the Panic influenced contemporary Adventist deliverance ministry. The paper highlights 4 key tropes developed during the Panic that haunt Adventist deliverance ministries decades after they have been debunked. Haunting or spectrality in rhetorical studies refers to anachronistic elements in contemporary texts in a call for justice. There are relatively few in Adventism working in deliverance. Those mentioned have been selected from a small pool based on their publications, platform size, and cross references to each other. This paper does not seek to question the sincerity, service, or efficacy of those in deliverance. I've talked to many of them, they're lovely people, only to note the haunting influence of the Satanic Panic on their work. During the 1970s, interest in exorcism and deliverance haunted the religious landscape. A combination of forces that included the social changes of the 1960s, the rise of the charismatic renewal movement, and supernatural Hollywood horror films focused on children, such as Rosemary's Baby, The Omen, and The Exorcist, created a concern that Satan was at work more directly in people's lives than before. In The Exorcist Effect, Joseph Laycock and Eric Harrelson demonstrate how supernatural horror cross-pollinated with Christian concerns, creating a feedback loop. After The Exorcist released, the Catholic Church received a significant increase in requests for exorcism. Wanting to distance itself from the practice, Catholic clergy referred people to Ed and Lorraine Warren. The Warrens were paranormal investigators that reinvented themselves as exorcists. As the Warrens became involved in exorcisms, their stories became the content for Hollywood horror, such as the Conjuring franchise. In turn, the content of horror movies became the content for deliverance ministries and spiritual warfare concerns. Intensifying the reaction to films like The Exorcist was the mainstreaming of charismatic renewal movement with an emphasis on signs and wonders. A new crop of deliverance ministries grew swiftly and rooted themselves both in popular Christian discourse as well as seminaries such as Fuller, where missionary turned church growth expert Peter C. Wagner embraced Pentecostalism and created a class, MC 510, Signs and Wonders, with John Wimber that featured, among other things, lessons on casting out demons. The class was controversial and extremely popular because when given the option, students found the prospect of casting devils out of their roommates far more appealing than exegesis papers. Wagner would go on to co-develop theologies of territorial spirits, spiritual strongholds, objects of power, and the concept of the 1040 window, all of which have influenced Adventist missiology and deliverance. Finally, during this time, a spate of highly sensational but fraudulent ex-Satanist narratives emerged, most notably The Satan Seller by Mike Warnke and The Testimony of John Todd. Finally, 2 legislative pieces protecting children highlight the vulnerability of children. All this created a spiritual powder keg that would be ignited in 1980 with a book called Michelle Remembers and give Adventists several tropes deployed in current deliverance ministry. SDA and SRA. In Michelle Remembers, psychologist Lawrence Pastor tells the story of his client, Michelle Smith. Through memory recovery therapy, Pastor reveals Michelle was given over to a satanic cult by her mother and subjected to abuse. The book's details rival the most extreme horror movies. It became a bestseller. Pastor and Smith went on tour, left their spouses, and married. In the end, the story was revealed to be fraudulent, with Pastor admitting that it really didn't matter if it was objectively real as long as it was real to Michelle. Pastor is credited with creating the term ritual abuse as it relates to Satanist conspiracies. Therapists, child advocates, and social workers began using the term satanic ritual abuse, or SRA, to refer to abuse by secret cults as featured in Michelle Remembers. This usage was further popularized by the McMartin preschool trial, considered the most expensive criminal trial in America. This trial involved false accusations, coercive interview tactics used against children that resulted in innocent people losing their and embedding SRA in the cultural imagination. As the 1980s came to a close, Gail S. Cookman, principal investigator for the National Center on Child Abuse and Neglect, examined over 12,000 claims of SRA. At the end of her report, she concluded that there were no verifiable claims of SRA. What she did find was more chilling. Quote, "Our research leads us to believe that there are many more children being abused in the name of God than in the name of Satan." End quote. Despite the term's abandonment, Adventists have not been delivered from its usage. The first mention of SRA seems to occur in Clifford Ponce's 1994 D-Min Project, an investigation of satanic influence upon physically, emotionally, and spiritually disturbed Christians, selected case studies. In the project, Quantz endorses Lauren Stratford's book, Satanic Underground, claiming she was, quote, groomed for satanic rituals of sexual perversion and torture, end quote, by satanic priests. Quantz observes, quote, SRA is so widespread, denial of this scourge in our society cannot reasonably entertain, end quote. This is 4 years after Harvest House pulled Stratford's book from shelves for being fabricated. Contemporary Adventist resources such as the Freedom in Christ Manual and scholars such as Bruce L. Bauer, Michelle Baudet, and popular speakers such as Conrad Vine continue to use the term. The paper, I argue, we need to adopt terms more like essays, which is spiritual abuse, or SARA, spiritual and religious abuse, which doesn't focus on a nefarious religious other, but widens the field to include one's own tradition. Too many times our speculation on secret satanic cabals and spiritualists distract us from the abuse happening in our own churches. STAs and VCRs. Just before and during the Satanic Panic, several moralpreneurs took advantage of Christian ignorance of media and popular culture by linking it with satanic conspiracy. Arguably the most notorious was John Todd. Todd promoted ideas such as celebrity pacts with Satan for success, movies and music being produced by witches, and wove them together into a conspiracy that would turn violent. Eventually, Todd was not only shown to be a fraud, but also a violent rapist. However, many Seventh-day Adventists clung to his messages. James Coffin lamented in the Australasian Record in 1979 that even after he had demonstrated fraud, parishioners asked, quote, so what if John Todd is a fraud and not what he claims to be? Isn't his message about the Illuminati and witchcraft still beneficial? End quote. Todd called for people to arm themselves for conflict. His work had a direct influence on Ruby Ridge and the Branch Davidian standoff in Waco, Texas. It also inspired Fritz Springmeier, who wrote Bloodlines of the Illuminati in 1998. This book is arguably the first work to link Disney with occult programming to brainwash children. This is also a popular theme among Adventist ministries such as Little Light Studios, who produced a film about the occult side of Disney and YouTube videos discussing Disney's hidden messages. Springmeier was later convicted of fraud, and his work is downloadable on the CIA website, likely due to its connection to Osama bin Laden. As deliverance ministries responded to cultural currents, most works on this subject mention the dangers of possession via media. For example, in 1986, traveling evangelist Philip Phillips published Trouble in the Toy Box. Phillips argues the real danger lies in the occult violent images connected with the toy, which are conveyed to the child via cartoons, television, and movies. If he watches the toys, it's displayed certain powers and projects certain images through the cartoon or movies, end quote. This leads to a downward spiral due to occult curiosities woven into the fabric of children's toys. This message resonated with Adventists who not only hold to an outdated hypodermic needle model theory of media effects, but who have developed what Alan Oveas calls a subliminal thesis. After analyzing Adventist messages about media from 1950 to 1990, he says, quote, Satan, evil angels, and the media and communication and entertainment professionals would be the conspirators, mind control through media content and secret plan, and Adventists possessing the knowledge to which few would have access would be the ones to reveal the machinations, end quote. It came out last year. By the time Victory in the Battlefield was published by Robert Gale in 1993, the trope of satanic media was well established. His account of a woman watching Peter Pan too many times as a child mirrors deliverance rhetoric of the 1970s and 80s, and despite advances in media effects research, which has long abandoned the passive audience model, Adventists continue to promote this type of thinking from official church social media, as well as deliverance ministries who also have Disney movie stories. It also highlights the need for more interdisciplinary work in the area of communication and theology. SDA and the D&D. An enduring symbol of the satanic panic is Dungeons & Dragons. This board game became a major source of terror in the 1980s with a handful of tragic teenage deaths. The game was believed to hold occult rituals and powers that would lead children to take their own life. 3 notable cases in a movie starring Tom Hanks helped establish this myth. I discussed these cases in the paper, which have been shown to be the cause of other issues related to emotional health and conflict in the home. The board game made for an easy scapegoat, much the same way an emphasis on secret satanic infiltrations can blind people to the abuse done inside their own church families. The paper notes numerous cases that show D&D as a pro-social activity that has clinical uses to improve mental health, yet it remains an enduring myth among deliverance ministries. Robert Gale listed along with Nintendo games as an entry point for demons. The Freedom in Christ manual, which is our unofficial official deliverance manual in the church, includes an appendix that asks, quote, "Have you ever played with a Ouija board, crystal ball, Dungeons & Dragons, or other occult games?" End quote. Church administrators also list Dungeons & Dragons as a gateway to demonization on their personal websites. Little Light Studios lambast the game, even mentioning the satanic panic before dismissing it without investigation. What's more, the host comments, quote, "Have you ever heard of the satanic panic from the 1980s? So that was big in the 1980s. People went crazy over specifically this game. So I want to show you a little bit of those cool nostalgic clips from the 80s. It's basically a Little Light from the 80s, end quote. This ministry explicitly identifies with the satanic panic of the 80s. It mentions none of the many pieces of research that have found satanic panic claims fraudulent, and it's also the platform where deliverance ministers such as Tim Maddox have had their work promoted, and they will be speaking at GYC this year as well. SDAs and rock and roll. The final carryover from the satanic panic of the 1980s involves rock music. Between 1972 and 1996, Adventist publications featured ex-rocker turned evangelist Bob Larson. Larson's name appears more than 80 times in Adventist publications, including an exclusive interview in the Advent Review and Sabbath Herald. He's even mistakenly called an Adventist pastor in the Australasian Record. Bob Larson, who moved into deliverance ministry, is one of the most influential voices on SDA worship sensibilities today. Larson began his career by crafting links between musicians, rock music, and Hinduism, which leads to demonization. He raised concerns about the use of Christian rock and then linked rock music to homosexuality, witchcraft, and the occult. Eventually, Larson moved into a colorful deliverance ministry where he uses a silver cross to stab demons and offers Zoom exorcisms for $500. Larson softened his position on rock music in the 90s, but Adventists did not. This is noted by one Adventist minister in Ministry magazine. Bolstering Larson's claims are those of John Todd. In one lecture, Todd speaks of his career as a high-ranking witch in the music industry and how rock is a part of an occult plot, including Jesus rock to ensnare Christians. Todd describes how this happens. Quote, "On a full moon, its master copy is taken into a temple room about the size of this auditorium that is in every one of the major music companies. That's placed on the altar, sitting in the north of the room, and a pentagram engraved on the floor. And 13 chosen witches and wizards in a coven come in and conjure up a principality or power and order him to tell the demons under him to follow every record and every tape coming off of that master. As I tell Christian parents, you can go home and count your kids' records, probably yours too, and count how many demons there are in your home." Thank you. This is why rock is so addicting. According to Todd, rock music allows Christians to cast spells on themselves. In 1986, Rebecca Brown published He Came to Set the Captives Free, in which she claimed rock music, quote, "Rock music is Satan's music. The whole movement of rock music was carefully planned and carried out by Satan and his servants," end quote. To elaborate on this, she talks of Elaine, a former high-ranking witch who gives Brown the inside story on rock music. Elaine tells her that when it comes to rock stars, quote, "They have all agreed to serve Satan in return for money and fame," end quote. Elaine recounts occult ceremonies, almost carbon copy of Todd's. These demons also spoke on records and could be accessed through backmasking, all for the purpose of mind control. While all Adventist deliverance ministries, as well as some popular discourse, seem to mirror these dynamics and aren't fans of rock music, it's David Ing, in his new book that came out this year, His Victory Is Ours, a Spiritual Warfare Guide, who embraces it most explicitly. He claims to have undergone training in backmasking in the 1980s and 90s, and in his book he cites Elaine's testimony from Brown's He Came to Set the Captives Free. He concludes the section with a list of ungodly artists such as Andrew Peterson, Phil Wickham, Taylor Swift, and Amy Grant. I conclude this final section with a discussion of Lillian Ducon's work, who points out that aesthetics are important in music, but they aren't the same as ethics. Those who claim certain styles are inherently devilish are preaching a pagan message under the guise of the Christian gospel. In the discussion section, I note the influence of charismatic rule theology and Adventist missiology in popular discourse. These have led SDA missiologists, including some mentioned in this paper, to discuss the witchcraft mentality, which is where every misfortune has a spiritual agency causing it. Furthermore, building on the observations of Karen Swallow Prior, the use of dramatic testimonies for evangelism is very popular, but the danger they can pose is significant, especially when discovered as untrue. Finally, there's a concept I talk about that comes from folklore called semi-ostension. That is when urban legends and folklore become a lens that we start interpreting ambiguous spiritual phenomena through. And so I think that that's possibly what might be happening. In conclusion, This study explored the haunting influence of satanic panic tropes on Adventist deliverance ministries by perpetuating debunked narratives often crafted by abusers, by the way. Adventists not only bear false witness, but they spread narratives linked to fear and violence with the potential to re-traumatize people with moral panic. Ignoring popular discourse about demonology and deliverance, particularly at a time when charismatics have brought spiritual warfare into American politics, is detrimental to an Adventist worldview. Adventists can affirm the spiritual realities of the great controversy without resorting to urban legends, moral panic, and sensationalism. Adventists can create ethical standards and expectations for sharing the three angels' message instead of allowing the message to be possessed by spirits of ignorance and a desire to grow at any cost. We can also celebrate conversions while exercising more caution on sensational elements. In sum, Adventists can fulfill the fundamental belief of growing in Christ by moving beyond the panic that haunts believers, that leaves them as frightened children stranded in spiritual neverland.
Thank you very much.